Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to today's ENVI public hearing on the European Citizens' Initiative for safe, cruelty-free cosmetics, commit to Europe without animal testing. In association with other two committees, it is the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development and also the Committee on Petition, and with members of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, which are invited. This European Citizens' Initiative collected over 1 million verified signatures from many different member states, which is a significant accomplishment. In particular, I would like to welcome the European Citizens' Initiative's organizer and the experts who are here with us today for this important hearing. I would like also to welcome and thank for the good cooperation our colleague Robert Niels, Chair of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, and also Jana Thum, Vice Chair of the Committee on Petition, and they will join us later. Madame Dolores Montserrat, she is the Chair Committee of the Committee of the Petition, and she will chair the hearing afterwards. The aim of today's hearing is to give the organizer of the European Citizens' Initiative a platform to publicly present their initiative and to engage in a constructive debate. And by saying this, I would like to say a warm welcome to our Commissioner Vera Jourova, the Vice President of the European Commission responsible for values and transparency, for accepting our invitation to deliver an opening statement today. We will have 3 panels on today's hearing, which will allow us to gain a comprehensive understanding of this European Citizens' Initiative. The first one is under the topic Protect and Strengthen the Cosmetics Animal Testing Ban, which will be chaired by Mr. Lins. The second is Transform EU Chemical Regulation, will be chaired by myself. And the third is Modernise Science in the EU, which will be chaired by Dolores Montserrat. She will come later. And now I will hand over to my colleague Lins, and then to my colleague Thum. Thank you very much.
Einen schönen guten Morgen von...
Good morning. Good morning to my colleague Ms. Spiriaki, to my colleague from the Petitions Committee. I'd just like to wish you all a warm hello to this hearing. Ms. Spiriaki already talked about the content of this petition, this successful citizens' initiative. There's 3 main points, which is to protect and reinforce the ban on animal testing and the chemicals regulation, and to modernize science in the EU. In the Agricultural Committee, I can tell you that the topic of animal welfare is something that is high on our agenda. Keeping livestock and animals is something that is part of our remit, and we want to and can improve that. And that's why I'm convinced that by combining our forces, we can work together, and we have to do that to find the best way for sustainable animal welfare and to respond to EU citizens' needs. So we are looking forward to this exchange of opinions, and that's why I would like to now give the floor over to my colleague from the Petitions Committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, distinguished Commissioner, honorable colleagues. It's a great pleasure to see that a citizen initiative received the support of 1.4 million Europeans. The tool of initiative itself gives visibility to citizens' initiatives and makes their voices heard. All these aspects are essential in participatory democracy, whose principles the European Union is trying to commit and more. The Petty Commission received several petitions on this topic of animal testing for cosmetics and in science in general. European petitioners are showing great attention, commitment and a high sensibility in view to plotting a roadmap to phase out all animal testings in the EU before the end of the current legislative term. I want to remark on an interesting point about this European Citizens' Initiative. One of the objectives of the initiative banning animal testings in the safety research of cosmetics is already a reality in the EU, thanks to the 2009 EU Cosmetics Regulation. However, the organisers are worried that the latest EU strategy on chemical could lead to possible exceptions or workarounds on this ban. What we're seeing in this initiative being used as a way to react to the political discussion in Brussels and to send a message of support to the current level of ambition enriched by law. The other objective of this initiative is ensuring that animal testing will not longer be used for any kind of chemical research, despite an EU commitment to ultimately replace all scientific procedures using animals in research, education and regulatory testing. We see that we are nowhere close to achieve this goal. So we're looking forward for interesting and fruitful discussion. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Commissioner Vera Jourova.
Thank you very much, honourable chairs, honourable members, dear organisers. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak on behalf of the European Commission at this public hearing organised for the European Citizens' Initiative, Safe, Cruelty-Free Cosmetics, Commit to a Europe Without Animal Testing. It is a real pleasure to be here again today to engage in a debate on another successful initiative. And I am twice happy to be here because I see the faces, I see the organisers here. We really had very, very useful, I think more than 2 hours, almost 3 hours of very, very useful exchange. I learned a lot. And as you know, I am the master of the process. I will be followed by my colleagues who are responsible for the content. But I want to repeat what I already said at the hearing in the Commission, because I want to repeat a warm congratulations to the organisers and all the supporters of this initiative who have successfully collected over 1.2 million valid statements of support across the EU with minimum thresholds in no less than 21 member states. Congratulations. This impressive achievement proves the commitment of many engaged citizens across our Union to campaign for their ideas to make an impact. These are the moments that bring the most joy, seeing participatory democracy work in practice. And if we translate the success of the European Citizens' Initiative into some figures, we see that Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics is the 9th successful initiative since this tool was launched, and the 5th in a row related to animal welfare or environment. Last month we replied to the initiative Safe Bees and Farmers, and in July we will answer also to the Stop Finning initiative. This underlines the interest of citizens in the well-being of both our animals and our environment. We have seen that these successful initiatives do generate long-term effects on EU policies. Examples of a direct follow-up to citizens' initiatives are the revised Drinking Water Directive or the regulation on the transparency and sustainability of the EU risk assessment in the food chain. It is true that turning an idea into legislation takes time. We cannot take shortcuts when making laws, and time is always needed to find compromises to ensure broad support for our policies. Our revised rules for European citizens' initiatives are also delivering results. Since these new rules started to apply in 2020, the Commission has been able to register 30 new initiatives. I am also happy to share with you that last month we registered the 100th citizens' initiative aiming at connecting Europe through a high-speed train network. To ensure that citizens are aware about this important instrument, we continue to raise awareness through various means, including social media promotions, events, and podcast series. Raising awareness of young people about how they can engage in the democratic processes of the EU from an early stage is also something that we strive for. Dear organisers, your initiative is an important contribution to the ongoing debate about animal testing. The Commission gives high importance to ideas submitted via the European Citizens' Initiative, and we take all successful initiatives very seriously. Today, the Commission is here to listen attentively to all the contributions and interventions from the organisers, stakeholders, and of the members of the European Parliament to get a very good understanding of the initiative and collect all the views which will help us prepare the most appropriate response. I wish you a fruitful discussion and thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, for your participation in this exchange, and also thank you very much for giving us specific examples of pieces of legislation based on people's initiative. I will go ahead by giving the floor to Sabrina Engel, representing People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, from Germany. Is she online? You are here. Thank you very much for being here in the room.
Thank you. As chair of the organizing committee, I'd like to thank you for having us here today, and I would like to start by telling you the story of how this ECI came to be. In October 2014, the European Chemicals Agency and the European Commission released a joint statement signifying that under certain circumstances, cosmetic ingredients may still be tested on animals. This news came just 18 months after the full implementation of the cosmetics testing and marketing ban and sparked outrage across Europe. Years of campaigning followed, but as policy did not change and the number of dead animals increased, the 5 largest animal protection organizations in Europe came together with a proposal for an ECI. Through our discussions together, we realized that the future of moving away from animal testing hung in the balance because the number of used animals was stagnating, there were even threats for further testing, and the implementation and use of non-animal methods was moving forward very slowly. Yet innovation in science and in non-animal test methods was rapidly advancing. So all these facts showed very clearly to us that urgent action needed to be taken, and in August 21 we launched our ECI with the support of many other animal protection organizations and with support of the cruelty-free brands, The Body Shop and Dove. Together we sparked a movement around Europe and with the aim of a meaningful change for animals. With 3 specific objectives, each addressing a specific problem and proposing pragmatic solutions to improve the lives of EU citizens and animal protection, we hope you agree with us and the over 1.2 million supporting citizens that our initiative is full of opportunities. I'll now pass you over to Reineke, who will tell you more about our vision for a better Europe.
Good morning, honourable members of this House, dear Vice President. The world, as we have created it, is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. This ECI is a story about old and new thoughts, and about how you, as representatives of EU citizens, play an essential role in calling on the European Commission to open a new scientific paradigm, one that will benefit the animals, humans and science alike. As you may know, animals have been intensively used since the Enlightenment. Here you see scientists such as Descartes and La Mettrie using animals, and they considered animals as machines, unable to feel any pain or distress. And ever since, billions of animals have been used for fundamental research, for education, and later on for safety testing. And it is difficult to change traditions and to shift a whole mentality. And it is mainly for this reason that, although we know now that animal-based research has serious limitations and the potential to cause severe suffering, it is still regarded as the golden standard by many scientists, as exemplified by the curricula of biomedical sciences. Luckily, animals are no longer considered as machines. As you know very well in this House, citizens deeply care about animals, as showcased by this ECI, but also I'm sure you know that out of the 9 successful ECIs, 5 are related to animals. And 2 call for a transition to non-animal science. So this is a very clear statement. On top of that, opinion polls consistently show wide support for the calls of this ECI. So 77% of EU citizens want a transition to non-animal science. In addition to that, scientific thinking has also evolved. Scientists agree that animals are sentient beings, able to feel stress, pain, and much more than that. Animals are able to have positive emotions such as joy and pleasure. And as you know, the EU has recognized this in Article 13 of its treaty and has acknowledged animals as sentient beings. However, the daily reality of laboratory animals is very different. They are not able to express their natural behaviors. For example, dogs are not able to go outside, and they suffer tremendously whilst they undergo these painful procedures. On top of this, many scientists are now questioning the scientific validity of animal-based methods. As famously quoted by Professor Thomas Hartung, a human is not 70-kilo rat. The translatability and reproducibility of animal-based studies for human purposes score much lower than advanced non-human methods. For example, on average, 92% of clinical trials fail to demonstrate safety and efficacy after having passed most of the times tests involving animals. And this is why more and more scientists are exploring non-animal approaches, human-based approaches, such as organ-on-a-chip, computer modeling, human trials, which have proven to be a lot more effective at protecting and advancing human health. You may wonder, the EU has not been unresponsive to these societal and scientific views and gained a reputation as global leader on animal welfare. The Animal Experimentation Directive aims at fully replacing the use of animals and requires researchers to always consider a non-animal method before turning to animal-based research. And besides banning the use of animals for cosmetic substances, the EU has set up AgFarm and is investing in a lot of initiatives to support the development of alternatives. So
Sorry, I have to interrupt you because you have only 5 minutes time.
I would
like to ask you all, please, to stick at your time slot. Thank you.
Yes, I will wrap up. Yeah.
Proceed by giving the floor to my colleague chair of the Agriculture Committee. Please,
Yes.
Robert,
Yeah.
please.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now this brings us on to the first panel. The headline of this panel is Protect and Strengthen the Cosmetics Animal Testing Ban. The ECI organisers now have an opportunity to sketch out their objectives for this part of the hearing. We've set aside 15 minutes for this, and we start with Dr. Julia Baines from PETA UK. And I have to point out, I'm afraid, that you just have the 15 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll have question and answers from the members, and then you have an opportunity to come back. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. As you'll be well aware, the EU cosmetics regulation established an important precedent worldwide for assessing the risks of cosmetic products and ingredients without testing on animals. Yet we're in a position today where the ingredients continue to be tested on thousands of animals. So first, I'd like to show you a short reminder of why cosmetics tests on animals must end. And I should warn you, you might find the following images and the sounds a little distressing. Please play the video. Thank you. If we can go back to the PowerPoint. So we've clearly gone a full circle since implementation of the cosmetics regulation in 2013, when we thought we were witnessing the end to animal suffering for cosmetics sold in the EU. Because in 2014, ECHA and the Commission issued a joint statement announcing that substances used exclusively in cosmetics may be tested on animals for the assessment of workforce exposure during the manufacturing process. For substances used in cosmetics and other types of products, tests on animals are permitted regardless of any worker exposure risk. As a result, the testing and marketing bans which you helped to achieve are being destroyed. Yet ending cosmetics tests on animals remains an important priority to all of us, not least members of this Parliament, because you passed the Global Cosmetics Testing Ban resolution in 2018 and again in 2020 and 21 signalled your wishes for such tests to end in your resolutions on the chemical strategy for sustainability and the action plan to accelerate animal-free research. So I ask, how many times do we need to ask for this to stop? We face hurdle after hurdle. 2020 saw the culmination of 2 ECHA Board of Appeal cases in which a German ingredient supplier contested the way in which REACH was being used to circumvent the animal testing ban. Sadly, those testing decisions were upheld and the company is now appealing in the EU courts. And we're not just talking about 1 or 2 tests. A report published in 2021 shows that animals have been used in 104 new tests under REACH since the bans were implemented. These tests include eye irritation, in which rabbits may be restrained in stocks and have substances applied directly to the surface of their eyes. Acute toxicity tests, in which rats may be force-fed the substance daily for weeks on end. And reproductive and developmental tests, in which experimenters may force-feed hundreds of rabbits or rats an ingredient throughout their pregnancy. The reasons for protecting the animal testing ban are clear. We're talking about the destruction of thousands of animals, restricting the rights of consumers to buy cruelty-free products, upholding legislative values, and addressing additional threats through the chemical strategy. Now, no one is disputing the necessity to ensure protection of humans, including both workers and consumers, and this can and should be done without animal testing. So unsurprisingly, citizens, cosmetics brands, ingredient suppliers, and even the Court of Justice are now questioning compliance with the testing ban. So how can we achieve our first objective to protect and strengthen the ban? Well, for cosmetics ingredients to be truly animal test-free, we call on the Commission to explicitly clarify that worker safety comes under the scope of the cosmetics regulation. And this is because the regulation aims to protect human health, and this must be taken to include both workers and consumers, because we are all human after all. Our next recommendation is for environmental toxicity assessment of cosmetics ingredients to also come under the scope of the cosmetics regulation, and this is what we mean by strengthening the ban. The regulation allows for environmental toxicity assessment to be achieved under the provisions of REACH, and in doing so allows for animal testing. But instead, we should be looking to maximise the use of currently available information and also incentivise the development of non-animal methods where necessary, because it's time the regulation caught up with the science. Next, we urge the Commission to protect the animal testing ban within upcoming legislative changes in the context of the chemical strategy. And this involves ensuring that any proposed legislative revisions impacting both the testing and the classification of cosmetics are consistent with the animal testing ban. And we look to prioritise the implementation and development of non-animal methods for any additional hazard classes where data gaps persist, for example, endocrine disruption. Finally, the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety has long-standing valuable expertise in using non-animal methods for risk assessment. Upcoming legislative changes, which could affect the committee, must protect their independence and innovative position, because this would ensure that any scientific evaluations related to safety cosmetics are carried out without recourse to new tests on animals. So the EU cosmetics animal testing ban has been recognised as the gold standard and incentive for transition and innovation without animals, and we must not lose this progress. And I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Julia Fenton, Head of Unilever's Safety and Environmental Assurance Centre, to talk to you more about ensuring safety without animals.
Good morning. Thank you. I think it's important that we see this ECI in the context of having regulations which promote both better human health and environmental protection and better animal protection. Unilever hopes that the high level of support from EU citizens for this ECI means that, as a minimum, relevant EU policies and regulations will be changed so that they facilitate transparency and compliance with the key legislative principle that any animal testing is as a last resort. That isn't the case today. The cosmetics ban, the testing ban in 2009, was a very important stimulus for big advances in non-animal safety science and the development of the new toolbox that we now have for assessing consumer, worker and environmental safety without resort to new animal testing. And as a scientist, toxicology, who's responsible for product safety, I'm frustrated that the new scientific approaches we use are not more widely accepted for regulatory safety purposes, beyond cosmetics and consumers under the cosmetics products regulation. In my view, this is actually a failure to better protect EU citizens from chemical exposures by using modern, non-animal safety science. And an increasing proportion of the scientific community are now sharing this position and are starting to speak up. Traditional safety assessments are based on animal testing, but we add in uncertainty factors of up to 1,000 to the animal data when we extrapolate them to protect human health to establish a safe exposure level. Historically, animal studies were the only tools we had, but that definitely isn't the case today. And it's rather like still using horses as a routine means of transport, even though we have, preferably, electric cars and trains. The uncritical use of outdated animal tests and the erroneous view that animal tests are somehow a gold standard needs to be challenged to a far greater extent by decision makers. The US National Academies will publish their expert review of thousands of animal tests on chemicals later this year, which, from the initial results that have been presented, show that there is poor reproducibility of the animal test results between different studies on the same chemical. Safety scientists now have at their disposal an animal-free scientific toolbox way beyond anything I could have imagined 20 years ago. And much of this is due to the US National Academy of Science publishing a vision and a strategy in 2007 for toxicity testing in the 21st century. Today, we see the outputs from this transformational change program being implemented by the North American regulators for chemical risk assessment purposes, with Health Canada the most advanced in implementing the new non-animal science-based approaches. Rapid advances in science and technology mean that we can generate much more relevant safety data in larger amounts and more quickly using innovative non-animal approaches. And last week, it was good to see the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety publish their 12th revision of the extensive notes of guidance for safety evaluation of cosmetic ingredients. And this continues to incorporate an increasing number of advanced non-animal tests, and which explains how these new approaches can be applied in making decisions on the safety of cosmetics. The SCCS also clearly articulated the challenge we have faced over the past decade for cosmetic ingredients, the conflicting requirements of the animal testing ban for consumer safety in the cosmetics product regulation, and the explicit need for manufacturers of those same ingredients to conduct animal tests to comply with the REACH chemicals regulation. Scientifically, but also from a worker safety perspective, this doesn't make sense. It makes it very difficult to uphold the commitment that any animal testing is as a last resort. The non-animal approaches we use to demonstrate consumer safety can equally be applied to assure worker safety, where chemical exposures are minimised through the factory safety control measures in place. I'd like to close on an optimistic note. Over the past few years, with the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability incentivising us, there's been a lot of creative thinking and many stakeholder discussions on how best to modernise the EU's regulatory approaches to chemical safety, including those chemicals used as cosmetic ingredients. Next week, the European Chemicals Agency will hold a workshop on transitioning to an animal-free regulatory system for industrial chemicals. I hope that this could be the tipping point that some of us have been advocating for. The ECHA background paper shows an openness to rethinking past assumptions and a positive view on short-term regulatory changes. In fact, it states, it is possible to develop robust options based on non-animal methods which can provide protection levels comparable or higher than the current ones for many toxicological properties. There is now also more openness to building new scientific capabilities in non-animal approaches more broadly across the industrial and regulatory communities. Pioneering safe and sustainable innovation by design without animal testing is surely something that we can all get behind, alongside the transparency and regulatory preparedness that are essential for building confidence and implementing change. As a first priority, we must tackle the cosmetics ingredients challenge and mandate the use of non-animal approaches for worker and environmental safety, as well as for consumer safety. That should have been done 10 years ago. Let's not delay any longer. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Dr. Baines and Dr. Fenton for your presentations. Now we'll turn to the members of Parliament to see if they want to take the floor. We'll start with the EPP. Mr. Polchak.
Thank you, Chair. And please use your headphones because I'm speaking in Czech. Já bych chtěl poděkovat zástupcům iniciativy, že zde.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the people who initiated this idea and who are here. I've been dealing for quite a while now with animal welfare, but what we saw in your presentations, animal testing for cosmetics, where millions of tests are undergone every year, we have to ask the question whether they're all necessary and whether they have to be carried out. And surely they need to be done with a minimum level of suffering for animals, and also there must be alternatives. I think without doubt, animal testing has led to advances in the realm of medicine. But when it comes to testing for cosmetics is concerned on animals, I wholeheartedly support your initiative, and I'd like to thank you all and everybody who has supported you. I would like to underscore that we should insist that European legislation is applied, especially the 210 directive on protection of animals against painful experiments. If alternatives methods are available, they have to be chosen, but that doesn't always happen. In the past, indeed, there were attempts to carry out this sort of testing on animals. Some areas of the community try to avoid that. It's not necessarily the final cosmetic product that is being tested, it's the ingredients. So I think there needs to be a more consistent application of legislation banning tests. So I have a couple of questions. Do we enjoy scientific certainty that the ingredients and components used in the cosmetic products are indeed safe? Our committee deals with product safety. Should your initiative not be broadened, not just to do with the EU issues, but also looking at other partners as well around the world?
Kollegen halten sich an die Redezeit von 2.
Thank you. Please, colleagues, keep to 2 minutes. Mr. Fogelson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will speak in Danish. Tak for præsentationen her, og tillykke med
Box is not working.
All right.
Yeah, the German is there, but the English is not. Okay. Can we try again?
Do it in English?
Yeah. No, I think it's... Yeah, it's solved. Please go ahead.
It works? All right. Jeg taler dansk. Jeg håber, I kan høre.
Thank you very much. I'll speak Danish, and I hope you can all hear me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll start from the beginning. Thank you for collecting these signatures. I wish you every success in the future. I understand why so many people are supporting this initiative, because it is indeed shocking. And I found the information you gave me moving. Animal testing in the cosmetics industry has been banned in the EU since 2009, and for various reasons for exemptions, I hear that there are nevertheless quite extensive animal tests carried out. Animals are sentient beings. That, of course, is one issue. But there's also a democratic issue, because we said with a broad-ranging majority that we do not want animal testing in the cosmetics industry. We have made that very clear in 2009, and nevertheless, it is still happening. This law then needs to be strengthened so that we can phase out animal testing. Just looking at the time frame, maybe I can put a question to you. What is a realistic time horizon? If we're to work as quickly as possible and the Commission comes up with a proposal, we in Parliament work speedily on it, what does the time frame look like in your mind when the law could be changed to get rid of these animal tests? Obviously, alternatives will have to exist, and the way I've understood it, that there are indeed many alternatives. But how do you see a realistic timeline? Thank you.
Die Kollegin Metz is draußen.
Okay, I think our colleague, Mr. Metz, our colleague Ms. Metz is outside. So, Ms. Rose, please.
Wherever, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to start by thanking the initiators of this Citizens Initiative. European Citizens Initiative are crucial for European democracy, and this is not the first time that we're dealing with animal welfare. It's not the first time we've reached 1 million signatures. We reached that when it comes to live vivisections, as well as shark fins, and soon there'll be one for a Europe without fur, where we're currently verifying the amount of signatures. So it's obvious that European citizens are concerned about animal welfare. And I hope that the Commission can rise to the challenge of this concern by European citizens on animal welfare. In 2009, we had already banned cosmetic testing on animals. And we'd also banned the marketing of products that had been tested or whose ingredients had been tested on animals. Now, I understand that the European Chemicals Agency continues to ask some producers to test products on animals if they want to see their products accepted. And I'd like to know, could the European Commission explain how is this still possible? How are these requirements still allowed? When it comes to cosmetic products, there is no reason for this to continue. It is illegal and the law must be applied. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Dann der Kollege Fiocchi.
Okay, Mr. Fiocchi, please.
Γεια σου Μαρία, τι κάνετε, καλά. And this is my Greek.
Good morning, Maria.
Nella mia opinione, e sarò molto controverso.
So, in my opinion, it might be very controversial, but if we have to save human life, then it's fine if we even have to test on animals. I realize this is a tough thing to say. When it comes to medical issues, we need to be careful that a European regulation against the use of testing cosmetics on animals, it might actually lead to a ban on animal testing for medical purposes. So, once again, saving a human life is worth a million animals. We have a beautiful a picture about this. For example, I have a rat infestation at home and we deal with it. But we need to give value to human life. It's not the same as an animal life. I'd like to remind our friend from PETA that every second 2,400 animals are slaughtered in order to feed the human population. So we should keep some perspective. What does it mean experimenting for health reasons, and what do we mean by feeding 8 billion human beings on this planet? So we have to be extremely careful so as to not to limit the possibility of animal testing for health reasons. When it's for cosmetics, I am completely in agreement with you. We should not cause suffering to animals just to make cosmetics. But when it comes to health issues, we really need to be careful. Thank you.
Danke, dann die Frau Kollegin.
Okay, and now our colleague Ms. Bignot.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. In 2009, Europe banned animal testing for cosmetics. In 2013, we went further and we banned any products that had been based on animal testing. Now, this continent thinks it's progressing, and we thought that this was a definitive win. However, today, and despite our strong measures, the European Chemicals Agency is calling into question these principles by demanding tests on animals for ingredients in cosmetics. So we're going backwards. We are forgetting our values. We are forgetting that animals are sentient beings. Animals suffer from testing, and this is why we had massive amounts of signatures in this citizens' initiative. The Commission has 6 months to react. We can't simply respond with empty words. We need to take action. Europe has banned cosmetic tests on animals. We need to change the practices of the European Chemicals Agency, and we need to protect both animal and human lives and the environment. Through this democratic process, European citizens don't have a lot they can do except for this citizens' initiative. Now, 2 million of our fellow citizens, including 250,000 French citizens, have signed this petition. This is an ethical issue. We are asking for concrete steps to be taken for animal welfare. Let's do something once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. And now our colleague, Ms. Aguilera.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you, as did most of my colleagues, for this citizens' initiative. It definitely is an example of transparency and democracy, and thank you for all the hard work you've done. Now, I have a few points here that I'd like to ask you. Perhaps you could clarify, since you're experts in this field. You say that this has already been banned, which is a step forward, no doubt about that. But then there is a regulation that allows some exceptions, and this is in the case where there are no alternatives. Now, I'm not speaking about the cosmetic industry. I'm talking about private and public laboratories that have told me that there are cases where they still need the exception. So I'm saying this doesn't come from big business. This comes from scientists. So I think that there are diverging criteria. Now, I fully understand that when we are looking for innovation and moving forward, of course, we should put an end to animal testing whenever possible. However, we do need to have some exceptions when, as I understand, there is no alternative and it's acceptable. So that scientific divergence that I see is what might lead to this exception in testing on animals for cosmetics. So it would be needed, and this is my specific question, perhaps we could have a moratorium, a temporary ban to make sure this doesn't happen again. And we can say, well, such a date will be the end of the exceptions, and from then on, then we will have to innovate and find alternatives. Thank you.
Okay, our colleague Ms. Novak.
Dear Chair, ladies and gentlemen.
Dear colleagues.
Good morning. Citizens' initiatives are a good idea, and it's very welcome that we talk about it. And then politicians have to react in an adequate manner. If there are other possibilities to test products, of course we have to tap into this potential of other possibilities, and then we do not use animals. We all use cosmetics, but this is not essential for our lives. Then let me mention testing of substances for medicines. Are you against this as well? Here we know that any medicinal product has to be tested on humans. We heard this very often. During COVID, we always said how many times we have to test a product on people. And then I would like to ask a question to our experts. Do we have adequate testing that can equally replace animals in case of testing substances for medicinal products? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Limetz.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I hope that the Commission will respond to the request of 1.2 million citizens with a legally binding act and proceed to include the proposal for the revision of REACH solutions to completely end the possibility of conducting animal testing for cosmetic products or their ingredient under REACH, which we know does not exclude animal testing, unlike the cosmetic regulation. This is a situation of legal inconsistency. It's causing damage to the credibility of the European Union, the same European Union that banned animal testing for cosmetic products completely 10 years ago, becoming the first in the world, now finds itself having to discuss this issue again and again. The solution exists. It is only a matter of identifying them and making them operational. And I believe that this is the responsibility of the European Commission. Of course, we could also now question why in general, but especially in cosmetics, we use potential dangerous ingredients and all, and how many new cosmetics do we need in it. A Parliament resolution in support of this SCI is crucial, but this step is not guaranteed. So we have to discuss this in our political group in order to have such a resolution supporting the ECI. Because this issue does not belong to political current, but to all the citizens who have believed 10 years now that there is no animal testing on behalf of cosmetics, precisely because of European legislation. And in the last year, we have discussed that this is not the case at all. It is important that the association present here and the 1.2 million citizens feel support here of the European institutions. Thank you.
So, vielen Dank.
Okay, thank you. If no one else wants to take the floor, then I would like to go back to the panel and ask the organizers. They each have 5 minutes to react to the questions and comments that they've heard. Please.
Thank you very much. That was some very interesting comments there. So the decisions that we make on chemical safety for consumers, workers and the environment, they must be based on the best scientific data and knowledge available. Because we've seen rapid advances in biology, in cell-based technologies, assays, in analytical and computer approaches, and these have led to new types of highly relevant scientific data being generated. So this isn't a question of safety, this is a question of using the best available data that we have, because this helps us to improve the safety decisions that we're making, whilst also enabling us to avoid animal testing. So, for example, next generation risk assessment. These approaches allow us to integrate various types of non-animal scientific data that have been established for assessing the safety of chemical ingredients used in cosmetics and in other products. And the cosmetic sector has been employing a robust non-animal approach for many, many years. The problem we are facing is in ensuring that it is implemented across different regulatory platforms. Because we can't say that we have a ban under one regulation, but then allow the very same testing on animals under another. It completely destroys the value of a legislative procedure. And then just to address some of the medical issues, my colleagues will take this up later on, but we are talking about advancing science, having a strategic plan to move Europe forward, to make sure that we are implementing the best methods, that we are replacing animals at strategic points, that we are setting ourselves goals, that we are looking for those priority areas in research where we can end tests on animals now, where we might need further input in the development of further non-animal methods. And this is very much a call to bring relevant stakeholders together and work on an action plan so we can move forward and progress within Europe. And I'd just like to hand over to my colleague Julia. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you. Yes, I think the key challenges probably that we face are not so much scientific now. So unlike in 2003 in the Cosmetics Directive 7th Amendment that first introduced the timeline of 10 years for a complete marketing ban, we now have had that time to develop the scientific approaches. The challenge that we're facing is actually being able to use those for regulatory purposes. So I think that is a bit of a different question from where we were and where some of the other questions are coming. I think in terms of there was a question about a time frame, and I think what we need to consider is that there are pockets of leading edge scientific capability. So it becomes a training and a capacity and an infrastructure type of issue in terms of where the investment needs to go to make sure that actually both for REACH and for cosmetics and other types of products, we are actually then able to use this, this modern science. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. So that brings, now after the panel, we've got the Commission who will take the floor. Mr. Engel. Mr. Engels from DG GROW, please.
Thank you very much to the members of the committee in the European Parliament to have organized this hearing, and also thank you very much to the organizers of the initiative for being here and for making your very interesting presentations. First of all, let me start with sharing the ambition to phase out animal testing. This is generally spread in the Commission, and this is also the feeling that you have from the 2010 directive. But I'll structure my response in two legs. First of all, a little bit legal, and then also science. As far as the legal aspects are concerned, cosmetics regulation already prohibits animal testing. You already explained it very correctly, and that was also something which was done during a transition period. Now, as far as we are concerned, the animal testing ban in the cosmetics regulation is carved in stone. And in my was never ever has somebody asked me to revise it. So it's widely accepted by the industry, it's widely accepted by everyone, and I think it's also very appreciated by the consumer. But we also have to admit that the cosmetics regulation only covers human health of the end users. So there's a number of aspects that are not covered by the cosmetics regulation. Environmental protection, for instance, or protection of workers. It's not covered by the cosmetics regulation. It's covered by other pieces of EU chemicals legislation, and indeed, these pieces of legislation do not require or do not prohibit animal testing. Because ingredients that are being used for cosmetics can also be used for other purposes, and can, so therefore, for these other purposes, there's still a possibility of animal testing. Yet, it's clear that if ingredients are being used for cosmetics only, then the cosmetics ban, the animal prohibition ban applies for the cosmetics regulation. Now, under REACH, because cosmetics ingredients also have to undergo REACH, REACH is requires, or REACH must specifies that you can use animal testing, but only as a last resort. It leaves the door open for animal testing, which is true. The targeted revision of the REACH regulation, and this is something that we will discuss also during the Senker panel, aims at increasing the available hazard information, also on substances registered in the lowest tonnage range and on endocrine disruptors for all substances. This will lead to enhanced health and environmental protection, but it might also have impacts on animal testing. We have to be honest here. And this is something that we need to explore in our response to the initiative and also in the future legislative initiatives that the Commission will table. And this is the legal aspect, but we have to rely on science also, because we as a European Commission, and it goes for all the institutions, we're also very science-driven. And what counts for us, and which is urgent, is the development of alternative methodologies, because this is what we need. You cannot ban something but without having a good alternative. And indeed, as you pointed out, science is making very rapid progress. The Commission is working very closely with a number of other bodies. First of all, the agency, but also the Joint Research Centre, which is very active on alternative methods, on non-animal methods. And also the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, SCCS, which is specialized in the safety of cosmetics. We're working very closely together for the development of these alternative methods, and they need to be validated, because it's important that these methods are being accepted by everybody who is involved in the safety assessment of cosmetic ingredients. Mr. Fenton already pointed out we're organizing together with ECHA and other stakeholders a seminar, a workshop that will take place during the 1st of May and the 1st of June. And that workshop will discuss steps that are necessary to reduce animal testing for all regulatory purposes, in the short and the medium term. and to reach the ultimate goal of phasing out animal testing in the long term. Our formal response to your very important initiative will be tabled by the end of July. And you will see we'll try to be as ambitious as we can possibly be, and the response will also indicate further avenues for actions from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Commission. That brings us to the end of our panel. So thank you to everyone who took part. And now over to the second panel and over to Maria, please.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we will go on to the second panel under the topic ensure human health and the environment are protected by managing chemicals without the addition of new animal testing requirements. I would like to give the floor to the representatives of the initiative, starting with Dr. Emma Grank, coming from Cruelty Free Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning to all members here today. I have a presentation. Okay. Great. So the second ECI objective is to transform European chemicals regulations. Find the right slide. And I'd like to give a little bit of context around animal testing and two key chemical regulations, CLP and REACH. The CLP regulation describes how data is to be used to classify, that is, to formally describe the hazards presented by chemical substances. And it is the REACH regulation which sets out what information is legally required to be supplied. We are focusing on these two regulations because the transition to the exclusive use of non-animal methods for generating regulatory data for chemicals requires the co-evolution of both of these regulations, plus some other supporting regulations. Now, there are barriers to the use of non-animal data for describing chemical hazards according to CLP. The European Commission's 2019 fitness check of this regulation identified that. CLP lacks detail on the use of non-animal data. It needs to be updated without delay and should at the very least be brought into line with what has been agreed internationally under the UNGHS, the United Nations Globally Harmonised System, where the use of non-animal data to describe skin corrosion, eye corrosion and skin sensitisation hazards is explicitly laid out. The long-awaited REACH revision is due to be published in Q4 this year. The supply of data under REACH today relies heavily on tests being conducted on mice, rats, rabbits and fish, and we estimate that by 2019 over 2.6 million animals will have been used in tests for the purposes of this regulation, and this exceeds the worst case number of animals that was estimated by the Commission and can only have increased since 2019. And we could expect a sharp increase in the number of animals tested on if current proposals to amend chemical regulations under the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability are implemented. The number of animals used for endocrine disruption, by our estimation, could be as many as 3.5 to 5 million animals. Furthermore, some 1.6 million animals could be used in tests related to the registration of polymers. Taking a long-term view, the number of chemical substances entering into the EU market is expected to rise substantially over the next few decades. Now, the impact on animals goes beyond simply counting the number of animals tested on. The testing of chemicals can lead to significant suffering, with animals forced to ingest, inhale, or have chemicals applied to their skin or eyes. And taking the period between 2015 and 2020 as an example, using data held by the Commission, we see that in 24% of all tests performed for the purposes of REACH, the animals experienced severe or moderate pain, suffering, or distress. The definition of moderate suffering can include surgery and the associated post-surgical pain, suffering, or impairment of general condition, whereas severe suffering can encompass many effects, including toxicity testing, where death is the endpoint. We see that 821 tests where death is the endpoint were conducted in the EU and Norway in 2020 alone to meet the requirements of European chemicals legislation. As the start of the As the state of the art of the use of non-animal data for regulatory decision-making advances, the REACH regulation must allow for the fullest possible use of non-animal approaches for generating new data, and the CLP regulation must fully support the use of such data to describe chemical hazards, and together these regulations need to evolve for a transition away from animal testing. The second ECI objective targets this need. We have outlined a 3-point minimum mandate relating to the second ECI objective. The first point is to put in place concrete steps, meaning with dedicated resources, meaningful timelines defined, and cross-sectoral support enabled to develop and implement human and environmentally relevant non-animal approaches for identifying toxic chemicals. The second point is to ensure that the rapid uptake of non-animal approaches is aligned between the European agencies responsible for chemicals, biocides, plant protection products, pharmaceuticals, and other products. The last point expresses that we do not want to see a defaulting to reliance on animal testing under European regulations as they stand today or in the future. Deadlines for the supply of data through testing on animals by default should not be applied at the expense of scientific rigour or human and environmental safety, considering the often poor performance of animal tests and the unquantified uncertainties associated with the data that they produce. So I'll hand over now to my colleague Donna, who is online, and she will talk about how such a mandate can be translated into action.
Dr. Donna Macmillan is remotely, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay. A warm welcome from Brussels.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma, and good morning to everyone in the room. Next slide, please. So how can we achieve the minimum mandate that Emma just described? Our first recommendation is the creation of an expert scientific committee with significant expertise in non-animal methods. This committee would provide independent advice and recommendations on suitable non-animal methods, as well as being able to provide inputs into any review of current practice, including upcoming revisions of regulations. This would lead to increased compliance, leading to a decrease on the burden on the European Chemicals Agency, and then, of course, a decrease in the number of animals used. Next slide, please. Our second recommendation is to increase the uptake and implementation of non-animal methods. The European Commission has invested many millions of euros in funding for the development of technologically advanced non-animal methods, but this hasn't led to a material change in their acceptance by regulators. Now, part of this is down to the structure of regulations like REACH, and because of this, the first and arguably most crucial part of this recommendation is to ensure that the regulations are future-proofed. This includes adding flexible language that allows the use of scientifically valid non-animal methods when available, and of course to avoid the need to reopen these regulations in the future in order for them to advance. Next, a regular review of the... Thank you. A regular review of the availability, the uptake and the implementation of non-animal methods, which could, of course, be done under Recommendation 1, the Expert Scientific Committee, that should be supported. And regulatory frameworks must be adapted to ensure the rapid uptake of non-animal methods. This can include the being able to use tiered testing strategies under REACH as it currently stands, or being able to use prioritisation approaches under a reformed or revised REACH. And this can all be achieved by implementing clear milestones, clear goals, key performance indicators, and all of these will be discussed a bit more in the next section on the third objective of the ECI. Next slide, please. So just before I conclude, it is important to note that there are non-animal methods available or under development for all toxicity endpoints that require assessment under chemicals regulations. And the only way to not default to animal models is to commit to a full transition away from animal testing by ensuring that no further new or expanded animal test-based data requirements are added to regulations. And by doing this, we'll achieve a win for industry, for human health and the environment, and of course for the animals used in these tests. And I hope that we have your support. I'll now hand over to Professor Jose Tarazona from the Spanish National Environmental Health Centre, who will be describing how this paradigm shift in chemical safety assessment can be achieved using next generation chemical risk assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I think that now we are able to have it online, and thank you very much for your connection, Professor José Tarazona. He's coming from the Spanish National Environmental Health Center, Instituto de Salud Carlos III, Madrid. So, Professor, you have the floor. A warm welcome from Brussels.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for inviting me to give my ideas. Unfortunately, I cannot be present there, but it's always an honor to speak to the members of the European Parliament. After 13 years in European institutions, both in the European Chemicals Agency and the European Food Safety Authority, I'm now back to research in Spain. As you can see in the disclaimer of the slide, that is what I will present is my personal view based on my experience and not the experience of the institutions. Next slide, please. Basically, to summarize the methodology that we have now for chemical risk assessment in the area of toxicology, we have two different approaches. One is the use of animal models. This is the methodology that was developed in the 20th century, the last century, based on what was available there. You need to have experimental animals, what the methodology was developed to look at adversity in those animals based on what was available at that moment, 70 years ago, on clinical effects, biological or biochemical effects, or histopathological effects. Later on, toxicology has developed. The current toxicology, what they call the 21st century toxicology, is mostly based on in vitro models, organoids. In both cases, you need an extrapolation, but obviously the extrapolation is different. You need to extrapolate from the animal to humans, in one case, and you need to do extrapolation from these in vitro cell methods to real-life humans in the second case. But it's important to mention that the extrapolation is needed in both cases. Next slide, please. If you look to research in toxicology in the area of chemical risk assessment, you can see that over 80% of the current toxicological research is based on these new innovative approaches. But nevertheless, when you look to what is used in the regulatory context, this new methodologies is really still scarcely integrated in the chemical risk assessment, not only in Europe, but also elsewhere in the world. Next slide, please. If you ask risk assessors what are the main reasons, the more typical explanations are summarized in this slide. First is that there is no experience. They did not have experience of how to use this information, or there is no guidance. It's important to mention that this is the typical vicious cycle. There is no guidance because we need experience for the guidance, and we will never get the experience if we do not start to use these new methodologies in the system. And the second main element that is argued to not use these methods is that there is a lack of standardization and harmonization of the methods. Next slide, please. Nevertheless, it's important to have the full picture to see other examples. For example, in the area of genotoxicity, we already have a very consolidated pathway that moves starting first with all available information, whatever it is, then only in vitro methods, and use in vivo animal methods only when that is really needed. And for genotoxicity, this has been consolidated for the years, is a common practice. And it's important to mention that in this case, one of the specific elements for genotoxicity is a qualitative element, but also it's based on the mechanisms of the genotoxicity. Regarding the second element, as has been already mentioned, there has been a huge investment in standardizing in vitro methods, mostly driven by the need for cosmetics, thanks to the cosmetic regulation, but also covering other elements like endocrine disruptions or genotoxicity. You have here a summary of most of the methods that have been developed by the OECD are in vitro methods. Next slide, please. If you ask what is my idea why this new methodology is not incorporated, I had tried to put my view with this example. What we are using today in the chemical risk assessment is still the paradigm that was developed in the 1950s. It's a paradigm based on animal testing and observation of adverse effects in the animals. Then you see what is the maximum dose that do not produce any adverse effect that you can observe in the animal, and then apply a factor, normally a factor of 100, to assume that this level should be safe for humans. When you compare the kind of information that is produced by this new methodology, the 21st century methodology is absolutely different. The idea is to understand what is the interaction between the chemical and biological systems at cellular, subcellular, even molecular level. So what researchers are producing are looking to effects at intermediate endpoints, effects not at of the full in vivo system, but just to understand the mechanisms, and then this mechanism is moving to pathways for adversity to extrapolate what should be the consequences for human health in case that the humans are exposed at these levels. Obviously, if you have the similar with the petrol gas, if you go now with a new electric car to a 1950 petrol gas station that you have only petrol, you can never connect the electric car here. Next slide, please. There are solutions. Science is always looking for solutions. And if you have a petrol station, you can always have a generator, create electricity, and then connect your car. This is what I call the paradigm evolution. We can integrate these new methodologies, keeping the current paradigm. This will imply use all existing animal information, but instead of conducting new animal testing, to integrate this with in vitro methodologies and at least do the comparison. These new methodologies are very useful for ensuring the safety of chemicals for workers and consumers and citizens in general. They can identify effects that cannot be seen in the animals, because obviously the animal tests are not perfect. There are effects like developmental neurotoxicity or adult neurotoxicity that are very difficult to be observed in the animals. There are also other human-specific diseases that obviously cannot be covered by the human models, but can be covered by these in vitro methods. So that should be always a possibility. Can also identify something that from the human health perspective is very relevant. Identify groups in the population that have a specific susceptibility, and also interaction between different chemicals that may require combined assessment. And obviously this approach will facilitate to getting experience in using these new methodologies in chemical risk assessment and to produce the proper guidance. Next slide, please. But what I would suggest is move faster than that and also deeper and go to the paradigm revolution. Again, with the example, if we have an electric car, we do not need to use petrol. We can use other tools and other options, much more sustainable, to get electricity and plug in or electric car. This implies thinking out of the box. The box that is a very nice paradigm that has been worked a lot during 70 years, but was developed based on what was available 70 years ago, what toxicologists were able to do 70 years ago. We have much more and better methods today. There are some elements that have been already integrated. For example, in the ECHA and EFSA guidance on endocrine disruption for the assessment of sun effects. This approach of using available in vitro mechanistic information and move to in vivo mechanistic information only when needed was already there. And there is a clear indication that for the estrogenic modality, in vitro methodologies should be sufficient to confirm safety for the chemicals in this particular modality. And this was already 7 years ago, so there has been a lot of evolution in science. Next slide, please. So what I would suggest that what we need in this decade, a risk assessment alternative, is to focus first on the integrated approach. Obviously, we have a huge amount of animal data that has been conducted that must be used. But the idea is to use what is available regarding animal data and other kind of information and complement the gaps using non-animal methods, particularly human in vitro models and other assessments. And with the current methodology, this can be supported with the in silico methodologies to do the read across from the chemical we have animal data to the chemical that we do not have, complemented with in vitro methodologies for both, and also supported by the artificial intelligence methods that may facilitate the incorporation of the huge amount of biological knowledge that has been developed in the areas of biology and physiology. So this will allow a new approach using different lines of evidence for doing the extrapolation with the focus of identifying the drivers for the groups in the population that are more vulnerable for the exposure to a particular chemical. Next slide, please. So basically the dilemma that we need to consider if we want to keep the old paradigm, single human guideline value based on animal studies that can be supported by something else, but keep this paradigm, or develop a new strategy that is adapted to the current scientific knowledge. Basically, it's to repeat today what was done 70 years ago, when the scientists and toxicologists and researchers joined together, put the effort to see, with the methodology that we have, what is the best way to have a risk assessment to protect citizens, as well as the environment. And if we repeat this today, we will be able to adapt to this new paradigm that will identify the drivers for protecting the most vulnerable population groups as well as the environment. And just to finalize, please remember, it's not only animal health and animal welfare. It's to improve safety assessments with the current scientific knowledge. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you very much for giving us the scheme that we have to consider on how can we reduce and finally phase out animal testing. We will go on to Q&A with our colleagues, members of the committee, starting with my colleague Pernille Weiss from EPP.
Mange tak. Jeg vil også gerne benytte mig af muligheden for at tale dansk.
Thank you very much. I'll take the opportunity to speak Danish, in fact, in this very important hearing. This is a very serious topic, of course, and I would like to thank everybody for the important contributions we've heard already. I think the proposal has been put in a very constructive manner in terms of what we can do and what is in fact necessary for the future. When we're looking at the cosmetics industry, of course, you could deem this to be superfluous. There have been technological developments that must be taken advantage of. But there is one aspect I haven't heard too much about. I'm a member of the industry committee as well, and that's why I'd like to put a question as to which other initiatives are needed, apart from a speedy revision of REACH. Better cornerstones, better orientation, guidance. Which other research-based proposals do you think we should be looking at? In the Environment Committee, obviously it's easy for us to agree that things should change, but it has to go through society. It has to be changed in industry, in the population, and they're subject to international competition. So how can we help these companies to make sure that they can genuinely find new alternatives that can be used, and so that they can genuinely bring a stop to animal testing without these companies being subject to a loss of competitiveness? Because that's also something we need to consider, i.e. that international level they have to remain competitive. Is there a form of support or help to facilitate these tests or technologies so that that can happen? We have to do this all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pernille, and I would like just to ask you to stick on 1.5 minutes. This is the time slot for the members. I will go ahead to our colleague Tilly Metz from Greens. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So we heard and we all know that the EU chemical strategy for sustainability, as foreseen right now, will ask even for more animal testing. We also heard that there is definitely a lack of data on non-animal testing. We know that fish, frogs are sensitive to endocrine disruption, but also to pain. There are possibilities to work with, for example, fish embryos. It's still not ideal, but it's advancing. There are also other new alternative methods. In vitro, human cells work directly. So, yes, we need tests to protect humans and animals, but not on animals. So what we need now is really prioritize validation and promotion of the so-called NAMs, non-animal testing, new approaches, methodologies. We need coherent political decision. We need funding. Looking at Horizon right now, there is, I think, a 0.1 that is dedicated to non-animal testing methods. We have in the Europe agencies like ECFAM that are doing active research on non-animal testing. We need therefore also better coherence, better cooperation amongst scientists. We need training. So please let's stop playing environment and human health defenders against those who are defending animals. Because we need testing, yes, but without animal suffering, to improve, as was said right now, safety assessment with current scientific knowledge. And also considering that other countries, that the United States of America, are really considering banning testing on mammals and explicitly really foster also the new alternative methodologies. So yes, we need to identify endocrine disruptors, critical hazard properties of ingredients that can harm our nervous system and our immunity, but we need to use the scientific current knowledge and to better share that knowledge. Thank you very much.
Before I give the floor to Aurélia Beignet, to our colleague from ID, I would like to ask you to express your interest on Catch the Eye. Aurélia, please, the floor is yours.
Merci Madame le Président. L'initiative européenne a été lancée pour une raison bien...
Now, this European initiative was launched for a very simple reason. It is that we no longer want products to be marketed based on animal testing. This should not happen in Europe. When we speak of cosmetics, most of these are made in Japan, Korea, or the United States. So, while this is a good step forward, we need to do more for non-European products. And we need to find a way to keep the tabs on all these imported products. Will the measures penalize European products while we continue to allow foreign products in? Are we ready to put in place the same restrictions on all products? Crucially, Europe must produce cosmetics while following these bans, but we should not be the only ones to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And without having any catch the eye, I would like to give the floor to myself as a member of the ENVI committee by thanking once again the organizer of this very, very important citizens' initiative in order to reiterate the lack of implementation of the banning animal testing, particularly in the cosmetic sector. Allow me to say that although animal testing is not a narrow part of the remit of CLP, but we will try to include a provision concerning phase out of animal testing in CLP, and I would like to try for this as the rapporteur of this regulation. And also allow me to reiterate that we have to work on a scientific base and taking into consideration the capacity of FECA, meaning that scientific base is at the heads of ECHA, and we would need also to enhance the resources and also to enhance the financing to ECHA in order to address such kind of challenges. Thank you very much once again, and we will go back to the reactions by the organizers for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the interventions and the questions and some key points in those interventions. I'm really glad to hear that you feel our proposal is constructive. We certainly aim for something that's pragmatic and implementable, and prioritising the validation of non-animal methods. Yes, this is crucial, and certainly it doesn't come for free. It needs to be funded. There's work entailed in that endeavour. And we certainly do need training for scientists and the use of non-animal methods, and that also extends to regulators too, who need to be competent in the use of non-animal data and comfortable in making regulatory decisions based on it. We are happy to hear for the support for including animal testing or non-animal method use considerations into CRP, and certainly agree on the capacity issue at ECHA. Is the critical implementing body for chemicals, and financing their operations certainly is key. The questions that I picked up, so what other measures or initiatives are needed, as well as a speedy revision of REACH? What research-based proposals are needed? How can companies be helped to use non-animal methods, and concerns regarding the loss of competitiveness internationally? Well, I would respond firstly by emphasising we're not talking about immediately ending all animal tests for chemicals right now. What we want is maximising the use of non-animal methods today, plus the rapid introduction of new non-animal methods. And non-animal methods equals better or equal to the protection we have today. And it's not about animals versus humans. That's not the equation that we need to consider. Regarding what we need to do, to develop and implement these relevant non-animal approaches, we really need to enable regulatory decision-making that's based on a different kind of data, data that is not in the same form as that is supplied by animal testing. And we are living with a legacy of regulations that have been built on a historical use of and current use of animal testing. And as far as helping industry, well, we need to make it very clear to industry what non-animal methods can be used and when they can be used. Certainly, part of this work requires that the animal tests that we have been using for so long should be properly scrutinised. They have not been validated to the level that's expected for new non-animal methods today, and there are very significant question marks surrounding the performance of animal testing methods for things like endocrine disruption, for example. Thinking about economic aspects, well, there is some benefits for contract research organisations in expanding into the supply of non-animal testing tests, and also for new test method developers. Industry can benefit here if they embed the use of non-animal methods into their sustainability by design thinking. This is really going to put industry on the front foot. And you know, the European market is always going to be lucrative, and that is without doubt. And thinking about what happens internationally, I would point out that increasing regulatory requirements for non-animal data is increasing. We see, for example, South Korea have committed to a phase out of animal testing for chemicals. The US and Canada, they've made a strong commitment to phase out of testing on vertebrate animals by 2035.
Very impolite. I would like just to remind you that you have 5 minutes to respond, but it is representing the whole slot that you have on behalf of the organizers. So please, because we have 2 persons waiting, thank you.
Okay, well, as that's my part finished, perhaps Donna, would you like to make an addition?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Emma, for passing it over. I would like to thank everyone for their interventions and for the questions that have been asked and for the support given to our section of the ECI. And just to address one of the questions relating to validation and promotion of non-animal methods, I would like to think that the workshop, the upcoming ECHA workshop, will be able to discuss some of these issues in a bit more detail. With respect to the promotion of non-animal methods, I do think that is a very important area to ensure that there are grants and funding and incentives for labs, custom research organisations, industrial partners to focus on these instead of animal tests, especially for newer hazards like respiratory sensitisation, where there may not be any validated animal or non-animal tests available. I'll end there in case Jose would like to add anything. Thank you.
No, I think that everything has been responded. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution to this very, very interesting panel. I will now pass the floor to my dear colleague and friend, Dolores Montserrat, the chair of the committee. Sorry. I was in a hurry, and I forgot that the Commission has the floor. And sorry for this. We would like to have the response on behalf of the Commission of Mr. Aurel Siobao-Dordea. He's the director of DG ENVI.
Yeah, thank you very much and good morning, honourable members of the European Parliament and ladies and gentlemen, initiators of this European Citizens Initiative. Very interesting panel indeed, and a lot of information, also illustrating very strong ambitions from the initiators, and it's an ambition which is also shared by the European Commission. I would like to reassure you that we work in the same direction to the maximum speed which is allowed by science, and speed and accuracy which science allows. So I would like to reassure you that the Commission does not want to lay or maintain any regulatory barrier that would block new methods from replacing the traditional animal tests. I would like to give you an overview of what the Commission is doing to accelerate the transition away from animal testing under the chemical legislations in general. Some of the actions have been mentioned here by some of your guests, or even by yourselves, or by my colleague Hans from DG GROW earlier. But for the sake of completeness, I would like to retain all the information. We are continuously taking into account newly available methods that reduce or replace animal testing. Examples are under the current REACH regulation as it stands. Information requirements that replaced animal testing for skin and eye irritation, an amendment based on an amendment of the Annexes 7 and 8 of the REACH regulation, which has taken place in 2016, and skin sensitization, an amendment in 2017 of Annex 7. The chemical strategy for sustainability, which was adopted at the beginning of this mandate by the European Commission, contains a commitment to establish and update a research and innovation agenda for chemicals that promotes the regulatory uptake of research findings. This includes a commitment to foster multidisciplinary research to move away from animal testing. And I think it is fair to say that even if the chemical strategy for sustainability is a political commitment of the current college of the Commission, and one would say that such policy papers and political commitments, you would say superficially, they last as long as the duration of the mandate of a college. This issue is of sufficient importance to represent a lasting concern and area of interest for the European Commission. So I think it is fair also to think that in the future political mandates, we will retain this as an important priority. We are a very active partner of the European Partnership for Alternative Approaches to Animal Testing, EPAA, a public-private partnership grouping Commission services and 8 industry sectors, which works towards the replacement of animal testing for regulatory purposes. Together with the agency in Helsinki and with the partnership I have just mentioned, we are organizing this new approach methodologies workshop next week, which was mentioned already here, under the title Towards an Animal-Free Regulatory System for Industrial Chemicals. The workshop intends to discuss with all involved players the critical needs to enable faster progress in this area. We are also closely involved in the Horizon 2020 project cluster, appealingly called ASPIS, and the PARC initiative, both of which are expected to bring regulatory solutions for doing chemical assessments with new approach methodologies. This important work continues to be addressed under the Horizon Europe program. The Commission is actively involved in OECD working groups developing technical guidelines for new alternative methods and approaches, and in a cooperation with regulatory agencies for chemicals in the US and Canada to identify how information from NAMs can be used to satisfy regulatory requirements. We are proposing how to modernize classification criteria under the UN system such that classification is possible based on new approach methodologies information instead of based on animal data. However, this is a slow alignment process that needs to go endpoint by endpoint. Finally, of course, we are preparing the revision of the REACH regulation, and we get a lot of questions in this House about the timing of submitting this legislative proposal. And I would like to reassure the initiators and also the honourable members of this House that when preparing the amendments to the REACH regulation, the Commission is taking the initiatives, the European Citizens Initiative recommendation to heart to future-proof REACH with language flexible to allow the use of new approach methodologies. So to conclude, Madam Chair, I would say, and dear initiators of this initiative, I would say that the European Commission is not only declaratively attached to and shares this objective, which is targeted in this second cluster of the discussion, but we have put in place all the infrastructure, and we are moving all the army of the Commission in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, and it is important to hear from the Director of DG ENVI in the Commission all these important initiatives to proceed with phasing out animal testing as soon as feasible. And of course, we are waiting for the publication of FRITZ as soon as feasible as well. We all know in this House that it is a decision on behalf of the colleagues of the commissioners. Thank you very much once again for being here and contributing to this very important dialogue. Congratulations once again for the initiators of organizing this very, very important initiative on phasing out animal testing and bridging the gap between the in vitro data and the data we need with animal testing old-fashioned approach. And I would like to go ahead by giving the floor to my colleague Dolores Montserrat. She is the chair of the Committee on Petition. Dolores, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm taking... Yeah, I'm changing. Good morning. Okay, so I'm here on behalf of Petty Committee. We are now starting the third panel. ECI objective, commit to a legislative proposal plotting a roadmap to phase out all animal testing in the European Union before the end of the current legislative term. To present these ECI objectives, I will give now the floor to Dr. Luisa Bastos, Eurogroup for Animal, then Emily McIvor, European Coalition to End Animal Experiments, and Professor Merel Risks, Institute for Risk Assessment Science, Division of Toxicology, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Utrecht. So all of them, they have each one 8 minutes, no, perhaps, or 5? 5? Okay. Yeah, because, you know, the time. So 5 minutes each one. So I'm giving welcome to to Dr. Luisa Bastos, and go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning, all. This Parliament can promote a win-win-win scenario for science, society, and animals, just by supporting, once again, a plan to transition to non-animal science. Because animal experimentation is causing harm to society and to animals. And when I mention harms, I'm talking about the harms to animals kept in laboratories, but also the harms to human and other animal patients who are still waiting for solutions to their conditions. I'm talking about the harms to the environment, where we continue dumping dangerous chemicals, but also the harms to researchers and technicians that suffer from the emotional burden of inflicting harm to other sentient beings. It's an endless cycle. And it is to address those harms that we are asking for your support to the third objective of this ECI, that asks specifically that by the end of the current legislative term, the Commission commits to a legislative proposal plotting a roadmap to phase out step-by-step animal experiments in the EU. And this objective is not strange to you. In 2021, 95% of the members of this House passed a resolution already mentioned before on plans and actions to accelerate the transition to innovation without the use of animals. Now you are joined by more than 1.2 million EU citizens and many scientists in supporting this EU-wide plan. So the question is, how can we get there? Researchers make choices based on the incentives they have. This is how governments steer and shape science in the EU and beyond. And EU researchers using animals believe that innovation can lead to breakthrough solutions, but they fear that by using new research models, they may face difficulties in publishing their research and threaten their access to funds. Sometimes research incentives are turned upside down. I come from a research institute where scientists were asked to turn towards animal experiments, to be able to publish in higher impact journals and in turn have access to bigger grants. We were asked to perform experiments on animals to be able to survive as scientists. So what can be a win-win-win scenario that provides the right incentives to successfully face the challenges that come with animal experimentation? We are putting forward 6 recommendations for a EU roadmap to transition to non-animal science. And all these elements have been adopted or implemented in some way in other priority areas. The first is a need for coordination of actions across Commission's Directorates General, agencies and government ministries responsible for aspects of research, regulatory testing, education and funding to achieve a strategic focus on the final goal. And the new Commissioner for Animal Welfare, for example, could take the leading role to coordinate actions and collaborations across all relevant institutions and stakeholders. And every roadmap needs milestones to focus minds and drive activities towards the desired goal, which in this case could be milestones to renew the EU research infrastructure, review curricula on life sciences, or end what is called in the legislation severe suffering. But besides establishing milestones, it's important to identify key research areas to help analyze the continued use of animals in these areas and how to replace them. And there's also a need to assess and expand key infrastructure that can allow for fuller exploitation of non-animal methods. And establishing milestones, identifying key areas of concern and infrastructure needs will help define an appropriate level of funding to support the replacement of animals in concrete areas. And lastly, a very important aspect of this transition, also echoing the calls of this Parliament, is education and training. Because researchers, educators, students, regulators, they all need support to change working practices and have the knowledge and skills to embrace the new methods. And the EU already has extensive experience in coordinating the adaptation and alignment of education and training systems in member states. Researchers are driven to help find solutions to societal problems, but they are still lacking appropriate and sufficient incentives. And this Parliament can help researchers to deliver better and humane science by reiterating its support to a concrete plan to accelerate the transition to non-animal science. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to Emily McIvor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So this third objective of our ECI is focused on a very different area from the first two, where regulatory requirements are directly impacting the conduct of animal testing. The third objective looks at how we can adapt research undertaken within the fields of academic research, basic and applied research, and translational research. This requires a very different kind of approach. Regulatory requirements we can fix with regulations. The context here is very important. And it's important to recognise that the movement towards replacing animal research has been something developed over many, many years. The first EU directive, Directive 86/609, acknowledged the need for the transition. And then Directive 2010/63 was the second step, with a greater emphasis on promoting better science through replacing animals and introducing specific 3 hours requirements to replace, reduce and refine animal use. There were important objectives articulated, not least that the ultimate goal is full replacement. But we've all learnt that directional statements aren't enough. It's great to have a goal, but goals are meaningless, and the framework that could, in an ideal world, create change, could also promote more of the same. So there have been many calls for change and many responses. And I think the Commission's response to the Citizens' Initiative Stop Vivisection included some very promising words. The commitment to communicate and disseminate information has to a large extent been met so far, with important work carried out by ECFAM to produce papers on non-animal approaches for assessing and investigating human disease, by the EPAA, the European Partnership for Alternatives to Animal Approaches, has shared information and has in some cases actually made moves to regulatory change in the fields of biologicals and vaccines testing. But a lot of this is about providing information and then waiting for people to take up the suggestions. And facilitating change isn't the same as requiring action. So when the Parliament adopted the resolution in 2010, the animal protection community was disappointed with the emphasis on reinforcing and intensifying current efforts and identifying potential areas where new actions could be undertaken within the Commission's remit, because we felt that without firm commitments or any sign of additional resources, there seemed to be little hope of progress. So we know and have heard the baseline is that the numbers of animals used in the EU isn't changing. I want to point out that what we don't see in the EU statistics is the number of animal tests that are carried out outside the European Union in order to meet EU regulatory requirements. I also want to point out that the emphasis on replacement puts the EU technology and innovation sectors ahead of other countries, and our emphasis is on replacement. We do not want to see animal testing simply exported abroad. We want to see replacement prioritised and developed here in the EU. To that end, we're asking the Commission to take some specific actions within their remit. For instance, under the directive, the Commission could broaden the amount of advice provided to regulators assessing animal test proposals. And within the Horizon Europe funding programme, we could see evaluations operating a gold standard when it comes to assessing the validity of proposals to conduct animal research, using experts who are expert in the field, who may be able to advise on alternative approaches for the sake of improving science as well as eliminating animal testing. So it's important to learn from our mistakes. One thing we've all learned is that words are not enough. We've seen very strong regulatory requirements made, we've seen strong commitments made, but these haven't amounted to the kind of change that we need, for instance, under the chemical strategy and, for instance, regarding testing of cosmetics on animals. So the next step depends on a broader, proactive approach, the transformation that will be described by the next speaker, and which necessarily includes all actors and actions. But leadership is essential. And this is the time for new energy, new focus, and new leadership.
Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to the Professor Marel Risks-Hoitinga.
Yes, thank you. My talk is a little longer than 5 minutes because we have 20 minutes for this whole session. So I'm going to talk about accelerating the transition to an animal testing-free world, how we could achieve this together. This is my working life cycle. It all started with a literature review at Vet College, where I decided to work on laboratory animal science and first believed animal studies still translated well to humans. I focused on refinement in my PhD, then went on to work for the Unilever company, being the head of the animal unit and animal welfare officer, then moved back to academia in Denmark, where I became the head of a central animal facility combined with a professorship, with the aim to implement the 3 Rs in the daily management of the animal unit. After 10 years, I came back to the Netherlands, being again the head of a central animal facility at the medical faculty in Nijmegen, again combined with a professorship, wanting to implement 3 Rs. I founded the 3R Research Center, but found the goal to implement the 3 Rs in itself not an effective movement, and found its circle on systematic reviews, which are a more effective 3R implementation method. So I have now my focus fully on replacement. What are systematic reviews? They bring us the most objective and complete scientific evidence, but strangely enough are not yet mainstream preclinically, in contrast to the clinic evidence-based medicine, where systematic reviews are performed routinely since the beginning of the 1990s. So why don't we do that for preclinical studies? We did a program in the Netherlands on preclinical systematic reviews, performing workshops, coaching and execution of preclinical systematic reviews funded by the Dutch health funding organization ZonMW, who wanted to know what the impact was. It has been published in PLOS ONE and it showed a major impact on research and researchers. So I invite you to read this paper and take this message to you. Systematic reviews demonstrate, in general, unfortunately, a low publication quality and low translation of animal studies to humans, which indicates a scientific need for change. But we all know change coincides with resistance. We are only human, right? So it needs perseverance and managing transitions. And for that, we have transition science. Transition science uses the multi-level perspective transition analysis. In the figure you see a lot of arrows, don't worry about that. All these processes influence one another. Niche innovations at the bottom of the figure refer to biomedical innovations like organoids. Socio-technical regimes refer to how we do things in science, in culture, in legislation. Then at the top, you see the landscape level. That's the society level. What does our society want from us? What you try to do in transition science to identify barriers, leverages, and opportunities at these three levels with a goal to identify opportunities to accelerate the transition. The Netherlands has the TPI program, which is oriented to animal-free innovations. The mission is to have better predictions without animals. The ambition is that the Netherlands can be a catalyst of the transition towards animal-free innovations, both nationally and internationally. The partner program was founded in 2018 and has 11 partners, including a recently founded young TPI organization. The policy runs in conjunction with 3R's policy to ensure animal welfare as long as animals are needed. What happens in TPI is a beautiful thing because stakeholders are assembled. Funding organizations, NGOs, academia, ministries assemble in meetings where it is discussed what we can do together to make the move towards accelerating the transition. To this effect, we need mixed methods research and flexible approaches where we combine quantitative and qualitative research. We need interdisciplinary but also transdisciplinary research, which is interdisciplinary research reaching out to society. Science is here for society, so needs to talk to society. Because providing scientific evidence is clearly not sufficient to make real changes, we need transition science. And this is an example why we need social sciences. The monocyte activation test from human blood was validated 25 years ago, but first now gets incorporated in the European Pharmacopoeia, which still does not happen in the US. Why does this take so long? We need social sciences to study why and how we can accelerate. Also, funding is really important. The Dutch research agenda is funding transition science on non-animal models and acceptance and implementation, and I'm involved in one of the consortia that recently has awarded funding for this transition. And the Minister of Education recently said that the Netherlands is thinking about a second round of funding, which is very good to hear. Within the TPI movement, ambition statements and target images are published. This is one of the recent ones, an ambition statement on innovation in higher education using fewer laboratory animals with the aim to move towards animal-free education, and it has been adopted by the two big university organizations in the Netherlands. The challenge will be now to implement this. I've been lucky to experiment with this multi-level perspective transition analysis with students, and I think this is really the way forward for all of us as it leads to co-creative interdisciplinary learning between students and teachers with these timely topics. TPI is Dutch and can of course not do this alone. So TPI has international ambition and activities. The European approach, and I would say the global approach, is crucial to lead to validation, acceptance and implementation of non-animal methods, the NAMs. TPI wishes to start conversations with other EU member states about validation of NAMs, to find common ground on what is needed to improve validation, so together we can accelerate our national efforts and improve our chances to a European approach. And please feel free to contact our ministry and Erika van Oort if you're interested to start on this road together. So let's make it happen together internationally. Phase out animal studies and embrace alternatives as soon as possible for the benefit not only of animals, but also of humans. Many NAMs translate better and are faster than animal studies. The science and technology are here to make the move. We need to develop a roadmap together, and this should be based more on evidence when making decisions, doing transdisciplinary research and education by connecting stakeholders, and do transition science towards internationally harmonized legislation and policies. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. So now we are going to the questions and answers. So now it's time to give the floor to the members. The first member that I'm going to give the floor to is Pablo Arias, EPP Group.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the experts as well who have come here today to give us their presentations. I'd like to speak about neurological and brain diseases which are very difficult to treat. Nearly half the EU population can suffer from this type of disorder, and this leads to very high social and economic costs. And it's a big problem in society today. The brain is a vital and very complex organ. We need a wide range of techniques based on different models. We need the human model, the artificial one, digital, but also the animal one. Experiments on animals are one of the most highly regulated practices in Europe, so that we can see how diseases and disorders develop and how we can treat them. So when treating the central nervous system, one of the main problems is developing human models that better mimic these disorders in humans. Due to the complexity of the human brain, this can only be done by experimenting on the brains of animals. And this is not just me speaking, this is what the scientific community says. So when we speak of an absolute ban by a specific date is premature. We cannot ban these types of experiments unless we wish to see a negative impact on research, since there are no viable alternatives. Finally, we can't lose sight of research and competitiveness in Europe, which would be highly affected. And we would see a brain drain out of the EU to other parts of the world where they can still do these types of scientific experiments. Let's not make some mistakes here based on ideology. Let's base our actions on scientific arguments. And this is what we should mention in all the debates being held. And perhaps the experts and perhaps the Commission as well can tell us how you can ensure in the coming steps that we keep this scientific community in mind, which upholds testing on animals. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Caroline Rose.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There are 23 million animals, the number of animals who are raised and killed every year in the European Union to carry out tests on them. Of course, you think of rats and mice and rabbits, but also cats and dogs, horses, primates, and even fish. We're looking at almost 2,000 beagles who are raised in enclosed areas before being tested on. So they're sold to laboratories. And what sort of life are they living, these animals? We import hundreds of primates who are raised in horrific conditions in Madagascar. The 2010 directive on protection of animals for the use of scientific purposes constitutes a major step in the right direction. And it means that they should prioritize the use of non-animal testing, but this is obviously not being respected. So we need to make sure that we're reducing animal testing. We know that testing on animals are less efficient than other methods. We see that all sorts of animal testing don't work when transferred to humans. Why is this not working? Do we lack coordination? We need a global plan, for example, to train researchers in terms of what alternatives are available. We also need to adopt very clear language, for example, by banning tests on animals if there are alternatives available. It's high time that we have a transition to animal-centered policies. And I'd like to thank those who've started this initiative, this citizens' initiative, the millions of citizens who've signed this, millions of volunteers who've mobilized to gather these signatures and who are mobilizing to try and bring a stop to this unacceptable suffering. We also need a commissioner dedicated to animal welfare as well. Thank you.
Now I'm giving the floor to Silvia Limer. No, María de la Pisa, Carrión. Sorry. María de la Pisa, Carrión, ECR.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the experts who've come here today. Europe should play a leadership role when it comes to scientific research and innovation, because historically we've brought forward great strides forward in knowledge, and because we want to be leaders in the development of medicines. Our priority should be to have the best environment for protecting human health while keeping our ethics in mind. We need to have conditions that allow projects to move forward in a competitive way. Of course, we should have research that allows us to have in vitro and not in vivo experiments. But these models are necessary. We need to have a deeper knowledge of diseases. Toxicity and efficiency of substances can't only be seen at the cellular level. We also need to look at the whole organism. Of course, AI can help us reach conclusions. However, difficulties lead to offshoring this type of research to third countries where there is no regulation whatsoever. Let's learn from what has already happened with energy. Environmental goals have unrealistically brought in alternative energies, which has led to importing of a fuel with even a higher carbon footprint. Let's listen to our scientists. They want to ethically come up with new therapies, and they are the ones who would prefer to use in vitro models as long as they're able to give us the proper information. But they are clear that testing on animals is necessary. The Commission says that it doesn't want to raise any obstacles. But don't you think this is contradictory when you're changing the regulation and setting such clear goals that are not keeping in mind what the scientific community is telling us? Should we not simply, before we change regulation, should we not prevent such hopeful therapies from coming about? Thank you, Mrs. de la Pisa. And now, Sylvia Limer.
Vielen Dank auch.
Thank you very much, especially to our guests. But for 20 years now, in the EU, there's a comprehensive ban on animal testing for cosmetics. Data that have been gathered in third countries show that third country products produced in this way can't be sold in the UK. But apart from cosmetics, there are medicines that can be very useful to save lives. And medical safety doesn't exist without animal testing, because the way that the effects happen and the toxicity and detoxicity and accumulation processes cannot be simulated in a Petri dish. This is also a task of basic research. Animal testing is always a question of what's the best for animal welfare, the fewest tests on animals, the smallest interventions, and the use of analgesics as well. And rightly so, they are very strictly regulated. It's not a question of ruling through emotions and saying that cosmetics have to be regulated by our hearts while risking the lives of millions of people. You want animal protection? Okay. Well, as a vet, I also want that.
Knowledge, a complete animal testing free world is not possible unless you are willing to endanger the lives of millions of people, including our most vulnerable groups, our babies and children. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to Marlene Busham. Non-attachment.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you to the authors of this ECI, Stop Cruelty, and their participation here. For 2 years now, the EU Parliament has asked for the development of a plan to stop animal testing in industry and research. Because despite the fact that animal testing on cosmetics being banned for a while, nevertheless, many of these sort of tests are carried out. And it's because an impact substance can fall under other legislation, such as chemicals or medicines, in which case animal testing is allowed. But 90% of constituent cosmetics is indeed subject to other regulations. So this basically doesn't have much of an impact. We know that over 5 million animals are being killed in this form of testing. So we have to shift to different forms of method, alternative methods as well, and they have to become the gold standard for that. Behind this demand, there are 1.5 million citizens in the EU who want to see politics do something and deliver on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to Pascal Arimon, EPP.
Thank you very much. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the very important input we've heard today. Thank you for all the experts who've taken the floor. The ban on the use of animal testing on cosmetics is something that I support wholeheartedly. The Cosmetics Directive has established a very important basis for this. We need to look at loopholes that might need to be closed, and I think we all agree on that. However, it is very problematic, and this takes me back to what our friend who is a vet said. If we have testing on animals, it's necessary for medicine, so we can't necessarily ban that. Animals used for scientific purposes sets a bar for how this can be done, that it should be avoided where it is possible. this leads us to a fundamental question of how, in the future, we're going to deal with animal testing in the medicine, where it can't be replaced, where there aren't alternatives. Mr. Shiraz said this as well. I'm not citing myself, I'm citing somebody called Professor Dr. Matthias Horneff from the Institute of Micromedicinal Institute. He asked me to quote him. He said, in the current state of affairs and for the foreseeable future, we cannot exclude animal testing by using alternatives, because that would allow us to lose the possibility of doing progress on researching into tumours, but also microbiome research, microbiology would be made impossible. And that means that medicinal provision would be endangered at the highest level, and in developing new medicines we would be dependent on third countries. Also, a large number of high-qualified scientists working in academic and non-academic institutions and on the basis of animal testing models would be forced to leave if there were a ban in the EU. That would risk jobs in basic research, but also applied research, and the training of future scientists would be impinged on. End of quote. These are ideas that I'd like to flow into the debate, and we need to create clarity here. Obviously, as we have a directive banning tests on animals where it can be avoided, that's something we support in Parliament, but where it's not possible, and here we're talking about forms of research that require this, then we have to leave the door open for animal testing, because our continent cannot be deprived of this if we're to ensure strategic autonomy and the health of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Yana Tom, Renew Group.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I had to went away in between. Can I ask the question from initiators of? Oh, okay. I'll take it like agreement. Yes, sorry, I missed maybe a part, but I was in the very beginning, and you know that Parliament is kind of slice of society. We are from different backgrounds. I'm not scientist, I'm not biologist, but I'm journalist, which means that I have a habit and a skill to check information. In the very beginning, you showed the video clip, which was very shocking, about a beautiful lady coloring her lashes with mascara, and you know there was bleeding, suffering rabbit in there. I just sent, I contacted a few academics in Estonia and asked them if this is adequate image. I was said, no way. Nowadays, there is no mascara that requires such kind of animal treatment. So this is emotional, I understand that. So my first question is, what is your estimation? How many people out of this 1.4 million who signed the initiative made their decision emotionally? For here in this House, we cannot allow us to be emotional. We have to rely on certain arguments. And my second question is, as during the design of this hearing, we didn't hear many counter-arguments. Are there any arguments of your opponents which you believe are valid? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Tilly Metz, Greens Group.
Yes. Against myths and rumors, there are facts. So I think we should organize as European Parliament, as Envy Committee, a visit to those labs so that we can see by ourselves the reality of the testing of millions of animals that is being done. But bon, first of all, I want to thank all the association, NGOs, and mostly also the scientists that work for that, and the citizens that signed this petition, which was really, really important, because what we all want, I think we agree in that, we want efficient, reliable, timely, yes, also ethical testing. And therefore, and Luisa Bastos was saying it, and that is my question to the Commission very clearly, we need a roadmap with concrete milestones to phase out animal testing. I know this is not going to happen overnight, but we have foreseen since 2010, where the directive on animal in science, we are focusing on reducing, refining, replacing, where the phasing out is foreseen. So it's already some time. And by the way, also to control these 3 Rs, we are not doing enough to really implement them. In some research sectors, speaking about tumors, sticking to animal testing that avoids us from progressing. I'm speaking, for example, regarding breast cancer. So we could advance there in research, in treatment, if we would use the NAMs. So animal testing is, at the end of the day, not very efficient, as it is not always or rarely transferable. We are not 80 kilos rats or even dogs. It's far from transferable, as I said. It's expensive. It takes a long time. Much longer, for example, than working directly on human cells. So please, let's make the NAMs a political priority. Adopt the regulation, educate also the regulators to get out of what I call a tradition. It's a tradition, and therefore I found it very interesting also that we should really make psycho-societal studies why we really stick to this tradition. I know change is always frightening, but here we have really to analyze something that we want since 2010, that we have in our EU legislative text, that we don't achieve to make it a priority. So we need to come away from the animal testing that are far from always being validated. Now we are focusing, NAMs have to be validated. But who was validating all the time the animal testing? So let's stop this cruel animal testing, and I really would like to organize this visit. I can also do that into the lab. So it's not about ideology, it's not about emotions, it's just about facts, it's about science. We have the Tierärzte gegen Tierversuche, those are science. I don't think all those science also here in the room are doing that because of ideology. We're doing that because we want efficient testing, and that is based on the future, on NAMs. We had to phase out animal testing, which is cruel and not necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to the experts, 5 minutes among all of you. So if you want, you can use the same order at the beginning.
I hear emotions and the belief that animal studies can predict so much for humans. I believed that for a long time until I started doing systematic reviews. So let's try and get away from emotions only and get the facts on the table. And those are scientifically valid methods, doing systematic reviews. And I think we can really get a better debate that way. I also heard immunology and brain diseases are increasing. Why not focus more research on prevention? It's becoming very expensive to get treatments for all those diseases, and we should focus a lot more on prevention. We can also do different research, like epidemiological research. Parkinson's disease is probably related to the use of pesticides. That's a very worrying thing. Parkinson is on the rise, so we should focus on those kind of topics. And then in the COVID time, we've seen we can suddenly be a lot faster in approving vaccines. So that is also something to take into account when doing new research, that it is possible to do more alternatives and fewer animal studies and get vaccines approved in 1 year time instead of 15. And then NAMs. Somebody said the competitiveness of the EU and people will move away. Let's use the NAMs to start new markets within the EU. NAMs are here to stay. There's a very institute in the US. Everybody knows it, I think, Wyss Institute. It's a fantastic institute gaining a lot of economy and attraction. So let's do those things too. We can do so in Europe, and we have good companies already. So I think that was my response to the things I heard. So Louisa or Emily, do you want to add?
Thank you again, and thank you for the fruitful debate. I would like to add that when talking about neurological diseases or other human diseases, we have a very serious problem. We have potential treatments that continue to fail when they come to clinical trials. And part of the problem is that we continue relying on non-animal model, or better yet, non-human animal models to understand the diseases and try to find treatments for those diseases. So recognizing the limitations of animal-based studies is a first step to be taken to be able to advance science and healthcare, because patients continue missing effective treatments for neurological and other diseases. And there is no compromise to be made between animal protection and human health. I don't think anyone is defending that. But thanks to our mistrust on the new methods, they are being developed in the right way. We need to understand the different way in which we are looking at and developing scientifically these new methods that do not involve the use of animals, because it's a new world, it's a new field that we want to do it right for animals, but for humans specifically. And the internationalization aspect of science is obviously very important. We need a worldwide transition, but the world needs inspiration and leadership, and the EU can lead by example, as it did for cosmetics. And scientific opinions differ, because we heard here about some opinions of scientists, but many leading scientists are also calling for and supporting this transition. And part of this transition is to ensure that scientists and industry and every stakeholder has the means to advance this transition. I'll pass now to you.
Thank you, Lou. And thank you very much, honourable members, for the questions. Picking up on the point about prevention of disease, we know about treatments. There is an enormous failure rate in the translation of drugs that have passed safety and efficacy trials in animals and then fail at clinical stage. A better understanding of human biology will help to produce better understanding of how to prevent disease. And this is especially important in the field of advancing health research. So it's important to look at this from all angles. In terms of the point about cosmetics testing on animals, every piece of material put out by the 5 organising NGOs of this citizens' initiative was fact-checked carefully. There is evidence, scientific papers have been written about testing cosmetics ingredients on animals. Nothing that has been presented in the area of cosmetics testing by our organisations has not passed a rigorous fact check. And I would say in the field of biomedical research, yes, it's not about ideology, it's about science. And we have new tools available to us, new technologies available to us that were never available when animal research techniques were first developed. We really can break down those barriers, and the barriers are holding us back. So if we really want to press ahead and make the transformation, we have to understand that barriers need to be broken and there is progress to be made. And it is being made by thousands of biomedical researchers who already do not use animals and who are relying on understanding of human biology first.
Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the floor to Ms. La Paza Santos, Head of Unit, Health Innovations and in DG Research and Innovations and Ecosystems. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So, dear honourable members of the European Parliament, thank you for organising this hearing. And I would like to thank you as well to the representatives of the European Citizens' Initiative and congratulate them for the success of having managed to put it forward. So, yeah, I will focus on the third objective, which, in my opinion, is certainly the most ambitious, the full ban on the use of test animals, not only for cosmetics or regulatory purposes, but also in research and education, in which most animals are used. We are convinced that this objective will be reached but only one science has progressed sufficiently to offer adequate non-animal methods for all needs. I think this has been repeatedly said by several speakers. As you rightly point out, substantial and sustained investment in the development, validation and uptake of non-animal alternative methods is key to reach this target, and that's where we will do our best in order to support this objective. Because we do care about the animals, about their well-being, but we are also aware of the limitations that have also been mentioned of the animal models. As you know, we have been a major supporter of this area of research with more than 1 billion euros allocated within the last 2 decades, over 300 research and innovation projects that have developed a variety of non-animal methods and strategies, some of which are used already in research and on regulatory purposes, as has already been mentioned as well. But the reality is the uptake is slow and more needs to be done to educate, to increase the awareness and to facilitate the use. And what is reality as well is more science needs to be developed in order to ensure that for all those areas where the non-alternative methods are not yet available, more funding will be allocated for. So although the budget to this area has constantly progressed over the years, Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe are funding ambitious research projects. Aurel already mentioned 2 very prominent examples, which are the ASPIS cluster, currently developing non-alternative methods to improve the accuracy, the speed, but also the affordability, which is an important point, the affordability of chemical safety testing. And also PARC, a co-funded partnership with member states to chemical risk assessment, which is currently fostering the acceptance and use of non-animal methods by regulators. As an example, they are currently developing a toolbox for implementing safe and sustainable by design framework promoting the use of in silico tools in chemical risk assessment. And the funding allocated to support the development of non-alternative methods will continue from the Commission side. You are certainly aware that the topic is currently open with a submission deadline of 19 September 23, where precisely we are targeting biomedical research in areas with limited translational value of animal-based approaches and where the highest rate of animal use or severe animal suffering. Another topic, to support more the uptake in particular by regulators, is put forward as well with a deadline in April 2024, aiming to support the training of regulators on alternative to animal testing. It's aiming to a crosstalk between different legislative sectors, including industrial, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and food ingredients. It is equally likely that the Innovative Health Initiative joint undertaking, successor of the IMI, will continue investing in the development of alternative to animal testing and will also foster increasingly the uptake by the health industry. A relevant call topic is planned to be launched later this year. And further funding we expect to put forward in the following calls of Horizon Europe in the years 2025 to 2027, because we believe that support to alternative is crucial to advance the scientific knowledge that will ultimately lead to the phasing out of animal testing. We are very grateful for you, representatives of the European Citizen Initiative, for all the ideas that you have suggested, that you are requesting us to put forward to accelerate this transition. We have listened carefully and we have appreciated a lot the intense debate that has been held today here in this forum. And believe me, we are working hard together with the other DGs of the European Commission and in collaboration also with the Joint Research Centre to see how much we can be ambitious and push further forward some of those ideas, of course, as much as science allows for the time being. I think that I am the last speaker of the Commission, and because of that, I would like to before giving the floor back, to thank you, members of the Parliament, to thank you also, representatives of the European Citizen Initiative, Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics, Commit to a Europe Without Animal Testing, for your views on this important issue of phasing out animal testing for regulatory testing, research and education. This initiative reminds us all how animal welfare remains a strong concern for European citizens. As I said, we have listened very carefully, your intervention, your ideas, and we are currently very busy preparing the reply in a form of communication that we hope will be adopted at the latest by 25 of July. In this communication, we will reply point by point to all the different issues you have been raised. Thanks for that.
Pues muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
We are at the end of these three panels and this interesting hearing organized by Petty, Agri and Envy, or Envy, Agri and Petty. It doesn't matter the order, but I'm Petty, so I want to thank you all very much for your interventions, and we are at the end of this public hearing, and on behalf of these three committees, I would like once again to thank you all for your fruitful debate and the interesting contributions of the points raised today. The hearing gave us time to hear and weigh the potential of the initiative. I want to thank all the speakers who brought some additional light on the issue at stake. A special thanks, of course, to the organizers for presenting to us this important topic. Thanks to the Commissioner this morning at the beginning for her intervention and reflection, to the EC representatives and to our colleagues who took the floor today. In fact, it is, and I would like to thank you, the Secretariat, for the three committees, for the precious work and support. And nothing else. I hope so that this work can help to these three committees to continuing to improve our legislation. So thank you very much.